extent applicable, their guests. The views and opinions expressed therein do not necessarily reflect those of News Web Radio Company or its management.
Hey guys, so a quick introduction to our show today, because obviously the world's a very different place now than it was maybe about 48 hours ago. The headline of the New York Times, "Spreading Unrest Leaves a Nation on Edge." I was out in the midst of all this, kind of talking to people, covering things when I was on the streets of Chicago yesterday. What I heard multiple times is there's two Americas, two very different experiences that people are saying that they're experiencing. And Sean, I guess that's what we're going to talk about today, that whole philosophy that things are very divided intrinsically.
Well, you know, we got a lot going on. We're coming out of a pandemic, coming out of stay-at-home orders. There's, a murder that happened in, Minnesota that's now turning into riots. There's a lot going on. We have essential workers, frontline workers, and we have two essential workers with us today. We have Sheriff Ron Hain and Mark Guethle with the District Council Painters Union number 30. So we're going to kind of get into just what's going on and how we move forward coming through all this kind of craziness.
Well, so Chicago was in a way up for grabs yesterday, as there was multiple cities across the country. And Sheriff Hain's actually the Kane County Sheriff. He may be coming and going with us because he is dealing with his own sort of protest that's going to be starting at 3:00 in Aurora. So it's a situation where he's going to have to be with us, but stay on top of that development as well. But I am looking forward to seeing what he thinks about the situation and anything he can kind of talk to us about. I'll be honest, man, I'm very curious. As a law enforcement person himself, how does he view that video that all of us saw and we're just like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah. Well, now, like I said, it's breaking out all over the country, and it's hitting here in Chicago. It's very disheartening to see. I mean, we never condone any of this. You're burning down our cities. You're getting violent with small business owners in a time when nobody can afford it because everybody's already been locked down for going on 3 months. So it's going to be interesting to hear their different takes, and I'd like to hear the take on how unions can kind of help move forward this country.
Well, it's funny because Mayor Lori Lightfoot actually had her press conference where one of the guest speakers was talking about appealing to many of the people, saying, if you're a union leader, you're good at mobilization, talk to people. We need to come together. We need to unify. And that's a very true point, is that where do we unify? How do we help? How do we bring this collective together? Where do we go from here, I guess, is the question.
Well, why don't we find out and introduce our guest, Sheriff Hain. How about you weigh in on this a little bit?
Sheriff Ron Hain from Kane County is going to be our guest today, and we're just really looking forward. And like we said before, he's going to be going back and forth. He's got some developments he's got to keep an eye on in Aurora as protests start going there. And Sean, you and I have talked about this multiple times, and I don't think this is a disputable fact. It is a God-given right in this country to protest. And if there's something that you're worried about, if there's something that you want to get out there, a message you want to get out there, by hell or high water, go out there. But when you start burning businesses, when you start assaulting people, that's when you really got to decide what's going on here.
Well, as union guys, we're professional protesters. We picket, we protest, but you have to follow within the law. And to just go and run around and burn everything down, it's not good for the community, the city, or anybody.
Well, absolutely. So we're going to check in again. Sheriff Ron Hain, are you there? And Devin, sounds like we have a little bit of an echo. If we can knock that down just a touch, just a smidgen, we'll be good to go. But we do want to hear what Sheriff Ron Hain from Kane County has to say about what's going on. So, Sheriff, if you're with us, please do weigh in.
How about you, Mark? Mark, are you on?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Mark, I mean, crazy times. What do you think?
Well, first off, the racism has to stop. We're going to start with that. And then as far as the protests and the vandals, they need to be brought to justice. I'm sure that a large portion of the protesters were doing it peacefully. And the ones that came in from out of state or from, other areas of the, maybe not from Chicago, that were creating all the problems, they need to be arrested and be dealt with. We're certainly, as a labor leader, and all the pickets that Sean and I do peacefully, that we understand the need to protest, but this is above and beyond what anybody else would want to say is a protest. It's anarchy.
Well, and coming off a crazy pandemic, everybody's locked at home for months. I mean, it's like when you tighten that wire and you keep squeezing it, sooner or later it snaps. And now we have this country just, breaking out all over the place. I mean, how has this pandemic been with you, with your workers, with the painters union? I mean, are people just starting to lose it, or are we all kind of, I thought we were going to come out of this stronger and kind of be getting back on track?
Well, as you know, Sean, construction never shut down, so our members are working.
Yeah. Well, we're all lucky that we're essential workers, and we've always been working.
Well, and it's a very different experience here than it's been in New York and other cities where obviously it's being the epicenter. My belief is construction was shut down too. So we've had some economic advantages. But one thing that decimated pretty much the economy of the whole country was the impact on small businesses. And very much like you said, Sean, here was the light at the end of the tunnel for these people who have invested their entire lives in building something, creating something, and putting their dreams to life and providing something for their community. The light at the end of the tunnel was there. And then this. And what struck me very hard as I was watching this today is it wasn't one great American city that was burning, but multiple. I'll think back to other riots I've seen in the country, and you can think of one or two that are going on at a time. But to see across the spectrum from LA to New York to Chicago to Minneapolis just on fire, our country is literally, as of last night, on fire. Mark, what's up? What do we do? How do we heal?
Well, first thing we have to do, in my humble opinion, is vote Trump out of office. Since Trump's been elected, he's been a race-baiting, xenophobia, union-hating liar. And his response to this pandemic has been terrible. So I'm all in for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, because I do feel that the world and our country needs to be united. And I think Trump is just dividing us. And his tweets are just ridiculous.
Mark, I am going to, we do have Sheriff Hain on the phone, and I do want him to kind of weigh in on what you said about the divisiveness that needs to be put behind us and kind of quelled. Sheriff Hain, are you with us right now?
Sure.
Okay, and one thing I want to talk to you, I don't know how much you heard about this conversation. We're talking about the healing and the unification. One of the things we talked about, I was on the streets of Chicago last night. I'm a journalist. I was talking to people. And one thing I've heard over and over again, and not the first time this time, but previously as well, is there's that sense of there's two Americas. There's a sense of my experience is very different than your experience. I'm sure as a sheriff, you've heard this as well. What do you say? How do you deal with this?
Yeah, there's hundreds of different Americas, right? And every faction, every group, every piece of society has their own experience in coming up. But this kind of leads to what I've been railing on over the last year and a half as sheriff about criminal justice reform. When I took over, we had a recidivism rate in our jail somewhere around 63 to 65%. We had the vast majority of our inmate population was African American. When we have 46% of our inmates are black, and at times 14% or less are white, yet the Kane County population is 57% white and 6% black. We have an extreme issue in disparity. So it comes with transparency and releasing that information from sheriffs and law enforcement, and it comes with a real action plan to start turning that around and gaining some balance in our criminal justice system. And I had always hoped it was part of my campaign platform that I wanted to reduce our jail population by as much as 25% by the end of my second year in office. And I always thought it was going to be through our reformative programs and structured release and exit programming. And lo and behold, it came from COVID-19, where we dropped our jail population by 33% just in a couple of weeks. And of course, that was out of preparedness. But look, when I talk about recidivism rates over 60% before this, because our philosophy was let's lock everybody up that we possibly can and just let them sit behind bars with no supportive programming and no exit programming, to where we are now with the recidivism rate over the last 2.5 months since COVID-19 began of 4%. 4% of those people who have either been released from the jail or deferred from custody and released on their own signature or given a lower bond to keep our jail population intact and safe during the pandemic, only 4% have returned to custody. So that is a true testament to what we can do in the community if we all work together as criminal justice partners to attain some balance.
Well, we were talking about, like trust in the community, trust in law enforcement, trust in politics. I think there's just all this outbreak and explosiveness. I just think there's a lack of trust in everything now. No one's trusting the political, system. They're not trusting law enforcement. And Mark, my question for you is, where are we at as union leaders? I mean, I trust my union. I trust what we do and what we build for the community. How can unions kind of play a role into building trust back into the community and like the working men and women to keep them busy and out of trouble and off the streets and doing all this stuff?
Well, there's several things we can do.
Sorry. Go ahead, Mark.
There's several things we can do. Like, since the proximity to the big city like Aurora, that what we do is we work with the community to try to bring in people of color into our unions. We work with the sheriff on programs that we can train apprentices through the jail process. And, basically work all together as one. And when we have abundancy of work, we want everybody to share. So that's pretty much what we've been doing in the building trades.
Absolutely.
You know what? I have a question for the sheriff that I think that's just to get out there. You saw the same video we did. Being a journalist myself, I remember my first inclination, I was telling my wife, Sarah Sadat, who's producing with us right now too, is you always have to question a tape that starts midway through because you don't know what happened prior. But when looking at that tape, I mean, I remember the visceral reaction I had that, wow, that knee's just not coming off the neck. I mean, at some point, that threat to me, a layperson, but as a member of the public, appears neutralized, yet it continued. Yet I see police officers walking around, not intervening, not doing anything. Sheriff, how do you look at that?
Yeah, at no point in my 23 years of law enforcement experience were I exposed to any training that suggested you put your knee on someone's neck, let alone 1 second or 5 minutes. So I have no idea where that tactic came from. And I have to be honest, I hate Monday morning quarterbacking when I don't have all the facts and I haven't seen the whole tape, but never is that an appropriate tactic. So we do know that. And here in suburban Chicago, which is the platform I'm going to speak on, we do have the luxury of incredibly well-trained and prepared law enforcement. So when I took over as sheriff, it was very important for me to institute a monthly training group to train all of our 240 sworn people to ensure that their tactics and de-escalation and stress-induced incidents were constantly sharpened. And when you train consistently and professionally, incidents like we saw in Minneapolis and other incidents of police brutality across the country don't happen because our officers react to proper training, proper muscle memory when an incident goes to some sort of next level of force that has to be taken to detain somebody. And fortunately, in the suburbs, I won't speak for the city, but that's why we see much better relations with our minority communities. And of course, through our work in jail reform and criminal justice balancing, we also enjoy better relationships with Black and Latino community groups because they have a little more trust in us at the sheriff's office. They know what we're trying to do. They see the sheriff in the jail, and I hear constantly when I'm out in the community, Sheriff, I thought it was wonderful that my friend's brother, who I know is incarcerated right now, he actually saw you in the jail leading a class or, shaking his hand at a program graduation. And when that bleeds out in the community, that the sheriff is boots on the ground and leading these reforms with a handshake and leading these programs to reenter people better than when they came into custody, that spreads that feeling of trust and improved faith in their police partners within our community here in Kane County.
Well, I think that's the only way we're going to move forward. There has to be a better sense of trust, and we really have to get back to just a better sense of community. I mean, saying you don't trust the police and then going and burning down your entire town and these cities. I mean, there's just no trust anywhere, and I think we just have to find. And I'm glad you mentioned training. So, what do you think is the best? I mean, is that what this lack of law enforcement, maybe these shootings or these bad situations? Do you think just better training will be a huge factor in fixing some of these?
Yeah, absolutely. When we look at the demographics where a lot of these incidents come from, it's from the larger cities where they have a little less span of control over their police officers, and that's why I'd say when it comes to the suburbs and more focused law enforcement support, we don't see incidents like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we are actually going to have to go to a commercial break, but we are joined again by Sheriff Hain from Kane County and Mark
Guethle with the District Council Painters number 30 out in Aurora.
And just having an invigorating conversation about what's going on and looking forward to how we're going to deal with it. And Sheriff, when we come back, there's something that I'm very curious about, which is being a member of the media myself, being a labor leader who deals with broadcast union members. There's a little bit of concern with some of the videos that we've seen. And of course, in protest demonstrations, it's kind of a situation of mass chaos. But for instance, what we saw on CNN with the news crew being arrested, what we've seen with kind of shots being fired with rubber bullets towards members of the media. I've always believed that the media is critical to democracy. So I do want to weigh in on, and again, I'm not asking you to Monday morning quarterback, but we will weigh in on that right after these commercial breaks.
This is Louis Kyer from GWC Injury Lawyers. Now that cannabis is legal in Illinois, an understanding of the law is critically important. Under the Cannabis Act, you can legally ingest marijuana only in a very limited number of places. Not in public, not on government or school premises, and not even in your own condo or apartment if your landlord has a no smoking policy. A positive test is potentially lethal to your rights in 3 key areas: employment, work injuries, and driving. So if your employer has a zero tolerance drug and alcohol policy, you can be terminated if you fail a drug test, even though your cannabis consumption was legal. If you're hurt on the job and test positive for cannabis, the legal presumption is that your accident was caused in part because of the cannabis, and your workers' compensation rights can be totally denied. DUI laws have not changed. Impaired means impaired, and a DUI due to cannabis or alcohol can ruin your career. If you want to indulge in legal THC before you ingest, read up on your rights at gwclaw.com.
Megan Financial is an independent retirement and financial services firm dedicated to the working men and women of organized labor. Megan provides straightforward, custom-fit financial advice and specializes in defined benefit and defined contribution pension plans, as well as participant and retiree health and welfare benefits. Megan Financial has the knowledge and experience to navigate the union member through all phases of life. Call 708-444-1090.
Securities and advisory services offered through Cetera Advisors LLC, member FINRA, SIPC, a broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Office location at 5321 South 94th Avenue, Orland Park, Illinois, 60462.
All right, if you're just tuning in, you got Life, Love, and the Grind with Sean and Raza. We're hearing from Sheriff Ron Hain and Mark Guethle, a business agent with the Painters District Council out of Aurora. So we're moving past Cook County, past DuPage, and we're going to kind of focus on Kane County, and we're kind of got with this pandemic and this rioting. It's kind of insanity, Raza. I mean, when have you seen something like this?
I can honestly say I've covered a lot of protests in my 20-year career as a journalist, and this has to be something that really stands out to me as something uniquely and fundamentally different in many regards. And that is to turn on CNN, to turn on Fox News Channel, to turn on whatever and see this erupting across multiple cities across the country and not limited to 1 or 2 places. And just the amount of momentum behind the destruction that's going on really caught me off guard. And I know before we were cutting into the commercial break, one thing I did want to address is, again, I've lived in DuPage County quite a bit. I've worked fundamentally with Kane County. There was a spokesperson actually in Aurora, Dan Forelli, who used to do an excellent job to put together law enforcement media seminars to teach us how to work together collectively. I've spoken at several of those seminars and engaged with law enforcement, talking about how we deal with each other, how we build those relationships. At the same time, what struck me is watching a CNN crew live on the air being first detained and then actually taken away in handcuffs. And again, this is one of those situations where it seemed to me, at least as a layperson, that they were clearly identifying themselves. They had the media credential. I remember the journalist holding the media credential up, and it just led me to believe, was this something that needed to be done, but then kind of figured out later, or kind of what the thought process is? And I want to ask a sheriff, like, how does that work? Like, I'm not asking you to Monday morning quarterback, but at the same time, how do you see what happened?
Yeah, certainly. So, there's typically in situations like this, we set up essentially a hold fast line or a skirmish line where nobody's allowed past a certain point. And, my take on that situation, again, not being there and not seeing the entirety of the context, it appeared that they had breached a point where they were not supposed to be. Obviously, law enforcement is under an incredible amount of stress. And as I sit here just outside Aurora, commanding our response to today's Aurora protest, I mean, it's the second biggest city in the state, and it could be subject to the same type of unrest that we've seen in Chicago over the last 2 days. And I'm watching our personnel roll in and out, and I just looked across the hood of my car as I sit here, and I saw one of our deputies' wives pull in to hand him his laptop computer, and they gave each other a kiss, and it made me reflect on, what, these are not Minneapolis police officers. These are not officers that have ever been questioned about police brutality, but now they have to hold that line. And so my take is that the reporters apparently had crossed a point where they were not supposed to be. Was pepper ball appropriate? Like we saw with that CNN reporter. I can't make that decision for those officers, and I can't cast judgment, again, not being there and not knowing what parameters were set with them. It seems like typically a member of the press has always been very respectful to us and has honored our hold fast lines and our staging points, and you can usually easily negotiate with them. So I couldn't tell you what predicated that type of response.
Well, and the sad part about law enforcement, and it's kind of the same with unions, is we're all packed into one big group. A union leader gets indicted for, extortion or something with money, and now all union leaders get painted this bad brush. And I feel like law enforcement has had that same kind of, reputation. One, there's a police officer that does something wrong, and then now all police have to deal with it. And, to our friends and family that are first responders, I mean, I have best friends that are all in law enforcement. I mean, it's sad that good police have to really pay for some of these, one mistake, and we allow these cities just to get crazy. Mark, you've been around in the union for a lot of years. I mean, how do you feel about being kind of painted in this brush of, within unions or police? I mean, we've always kind of had a rough, look at things too. They kind of blame stuff on us and look at unions as in a negative light. I mean, how do we shift that?
For the most part, the police chiefs in Kane, DuPage, Kendall, King County, and the policemen, we've always had a pretty good relationship with the building trades in this area for the past 25 years. They're really, our protests are usually a balloon and a bunch of men and women with picket signs. We don't really have any confrontation, so to speak, that I'm aware of. But people in general view protest as something bad. In our case, our protest is is something good. We want to call out a contractor or an employer exploiting workers, job conditions, those types of things, pay. So that's why we protest, and that's why unions protest for the most part. Confrontation-wise, I just can't think of one time where I had a confrontation at all with any police. I take it back. One time in Glen Ellen, when I had my balloon up, the rookie cop, he had asked me to take down the balloon, and I said no. And he said, well, if you don't take it down, he would take it down. And I told him to call the chief, and in a matter of minutes, he came out and apologized. But for the most part, with us, the union leaders and members picketing, we don't really confront with the police. A lot of times, police would basically support us, like in DeKalb. But to your point, I think some people view that as a negative if they see a picket or a protest, and certainly our members don't view it that way if they're laid off or if they're being exploited. So for the most part, I think, like I said earlier, I support protests, but we certainly do not support anarchy, vandals, and criminals. That type of action. So I think I answered your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like I said, we're never against protesting. We're professional protesters, peaceful protesters, but it just gets it's just how the escalation of how things go so fast. It's kind of unbelievable. And I mean, I mean, what about you, Raz? I definitely worry about first responders. I mean, we're all been deemed essential workers that have been already putting our lives on the line with this pandemic, working every day. And now even more first responders are putting their life on the line with riots.
Well, and I'll tell you absolutely, from the perspective of a journalist, because that's my expertise, that's what I'll speak to. We are professional observers. That's our job, to go in there, not to make judgment, to document the story that's going on, and to do it not only for the people who are watching at the time, but for the posterity of history. But what happens is, being also a union leader, my job gets a little bit more difficult, because I do have to take the side of making sure that my people are safe when they're out there, that my people are protected and also not put in harm's way. And of course, this is exactly what the police are having to deal with. And I get it. I've had those conversations with police officers who understand exactly what's going on. They understand the right to protest. But it's just a complex situation with a lot of emotions, and people forget, hey, we're not all one way or the other. There's these complexities. Nobody's willing to look past these complexities when the city, they're just looking at it's us against them. And that's what I think that we need to step up and mobilize. And that's what I loved in that press conference with the mayor, where it was called upon that, hey, the goal here should be unification. The goal here is to make what's perceived as this two country, or like the sheriff said, hundreds of countries, into this one solid unit where we have divergent thoughts, but we're doing something together collectively as humanity, together collectively as a society.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Sheriff, I'm going to ask you this. I mean, you are, in the matter of probably minutes, going to face something, hopefully nothing like what we saw in Chicago, but at the end of the day, you don't know. What are you expecting? How are you telling your officers to handle it?
So an important note about protests, there seem to be two different factions that come out. You have the vast majority that are trying to spread a positive message, trying to create reform, raise awareness, and those are the groups that we absolutely support, and we always will in protests. We just hope for open communication between us and them. So let's say they want to move from a park and they want to go on a march. Well, just let us know your route, and we'll make sure the roads are blocked so we don't have any traffic issues and everyone's safe. And then you have a small faction that will come out, and that's kind of what we may be anticipating here today in Aurora, who they're referred to as hired protesters or hired demonstrators, who come out just to create havoc amongst that group. And unfortunately, you get some sort of group think going, right? Because you have this massive of people who are assembled. They're all there for the same thing. They begin chanting, and then they just tend to follow these instigators. Not necessarily the vast majority will begin looting or engaging violently with police, but they're still there in numbers, and of course their safety is not affected. So that's what we're anticipating today, and that's what we're prepared for here in Aurora, as we assemble law enforcement in mass around the town and prepare our response. We're here to support them in any capacity to ensure everyone's safety, and of course try and mitigate anyone that wants to turn it in a negative direction. And that's how my staff is positioned. So we have a myriad of different assets ready to go should we need it. But hopefully in about 20 minutes here, once we get done, I will drive down to the main protest area and mingle with the protesters, shake hands with community leaders that are down there, and we see nothing but positivity come out of Aurora and this great county out west.
Well, and I can't say this with complete 100% fact, but I would say pretty strongly that all these protesters are not our union members. The building trades are not going to be out there rioting and doing all that. How important is it, Mark, this is for you, of just having these communities grow within the union, having a better career, having a better lifestyle? It gets you away from all that. I mean, how important is it to have such a good career, especially a union one, with keeping these people out of trouble?
Well, that's why we have an ongoing relationship with all the different groups in Aurora. food pantries. The building trades always supports the food pantry. We support the Red Cross, United Way. There's a whole large list of them. And as well as I do, Sean, that the building trades are always big supporters of the schools and any needy organization in Stamen DuPage. But here's something just came up. Pittsburgh police chief says white males dressed in anarchist attire hijacked the George Floyd protest downtown. So there's people out there that are being paid to disrupt the protests.
Mhm.
And that's the same in Minnesota.
Yeah. And I mean, it creates chaos. You can't find peace and division when everyone's just fighting against each other. And like I say, I don't know how we're going to rebuild this. I mean, we talked to politics a little bit before and Donald Trump and getting a new president, but how do we fix these divides? I mean, we're so Democrat and Republican, or blue lives and black lives. And I mean, we have to find a better way to bring some unity within our country that I feel like it's really starting to kind of break. What do you think, Russell?
Well, I think it's absolutely elusive.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry, I'll get back to you, but I think it's absolutely elusive. And when you look at the fact that there are potentially people who are coming in there and, like you said, hijacking demonstrations, it's very obvious that there are people with a certain agenda that does not include unification. There's a certain segment and fragment of the population who has a stake in that divisiveness. And I think we talk a lot about unions. Let's look at union history as we do. Unions themselves weren't always inclusive. There were segments of the population that were discriminated against as early as earlier in the century in Chicago. But what happened was, when these obstacles were overcome, there were African American communities that didn't trust the union. But there was a publisher, and I'm forgetting his name, last name Abbott, who worked for the Chicago Defender, who advocated that now you're in a position where you can work together, jump on that opportunity. And they did, and it became more inclusive. And with that unity came power. And I think that's what's very important, is to realize the benefit you get when you work together and see how we can make it work for all of us. That's my take. But again, I don't want to take your time, Mark. So you tell me what you think.
Is that a question for Mark?
Yeah, that's for you, Mark.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I really do. I've been around so long. This is my 40th year in the painters union, so I've been around a pretty long time. And I would say through the years that the building trades are more inclusive. We have more minority participants. We have expanded opportunity for more people. We reach out to the community. We're seeing gangs on all different segments: African American, Latino, Asian American, Indian. We're very inclusive. We include everybody. There's always a job waiting for somebody who's willing to work in a union. Now, what brings we have to circle back a little bit to politics here. If you remember Donald Trump, his first thing when he got on an escalator and was going down the stairs, and he basically, I'll sum up what he said. He said, we're going to build this wall, and we're going to start, getting rid of the illegals. So, I'm paraphrasing what he said. And he started off his presidency with division. And a lot of the hate crimes that are caused by the white extremists, the Nazis, those people are his supporters. So you have to look at it as, if you have a leader who doesn't think that, say, his words mean anything when he says it, it's a huge problem for us. He's such a racist and a liar and a xenophobe that I blame him for the divisions in our country.
Well, I mean, but quite honestly, these divisions have a legacy in our country. Though there may be fuel to the fire with some of the words that come out of his mouth, this is not a new problem. We've seen this for decades. And my question is, how do we change this? How do we decide that, okay, at this point, we've seen these protests before, but it's going across multiple places from New York to LA, and goddamn it, now it's time to make a change and to really decide what we're going to do to come together as a country and really make and affect a change. And how do we do that? Throw anyone who wants to answer.
Racism needs to stop. It just has to stop. We have to stop
fix that
racism,
problem, right? I mean, it's easy to say, but a lot of it's like cultural, right? I mean, it's like you need to get to like the source, like that's like bred in you almost, you know? I mean, it's like, how do we just say, I mean, we've been talking and spinning on racism for 50 years, 150 years, 350 years. Like, what is that answer? I mean, like I say, in my opinion, that's where I think the unions are such a crucial role is in just bringing us together within, such a diverse group of people that all come together with one common cause of hardworking Americans. But it's, how do we fight this racism or the systemic racism or in any of these groups? I mean,
well, I don't speak as a law enforcement professional, but when somebody puts their leg or knee on somebody's neck and chokes them to death and kills them, we have a problem with policing and racial profiling. And I'm not saying we have it in Kane County. I'm sure that police in our areas are fine, but we have to look at what some of the root of the problem is with people who do those types of things. Somebody like that officer in Minnesota needs to be brought to justice, and anything like that, it has to be done expeditiously. It can't linger on like a few of the other cases. I'm not a professional law enforcement, but we have to do something there. That has to change.
Well, my question
Absolutely,
is
and luckily we do have a professional in policing. And I know we got one more commercial. We usually wait to take it at a certain time, but let's get it out of the way because this is a conversation that I know I want to continue.
Yeah,
I want to get to your question, Sean, but I do want to talk with the sheriff about representative policing, about the fact that is it important to make sure that your police force is representative of the demographics that you are serving? Does that in any way benefit, mitigate any of these problems? And let's talk about how that may or may not help right after this commercial break.
Life, Love, and the Grind is proudly sponsored by Rich Lewandowski and our friends at Breaker Press, Chicagoland's top choice for union printing. We're a third-generation family-owned business that has been helping unions in political campaigns win since 1976. We've been involved in hundreds of winning elections, and we get our printed materials to you on time and on budget every time. Whether you're running for the courthouse or the White House, we will take you from concept to design and from print to mail or your supporters' front yards. Breaker Press can help you reach the voters you need. Call Rich at 773-852-5733 or email rich@breakerpress.com. For all of your political printing needs, visit us at breakerpress.com.
All right, if you're just tuning in, you got Sean and Raza, Life, Love, and the Grind. We got Sheriff Ron Hain and Mark Guethle with the Painters Union. So, I had a question for you, Sheriff. So here's my take on this rioting. So everyone's pretty much in favor. They're against this officer who kneeled on this guy's neck. I haven't been following it that recently, but he's going to be fired. He's probably going to get charged. I haven't heard any police. I have a lot of friends that have said, "Oh, that guy, wasn't in the wrong." Everyone's against it. So why are the riots? Like, what more do they possibly want? Like, how much more justice do you need from this guy? And it's like, the guy's getting justice, and now they're still burning the cities down. So what's your take on this? Like, when is enough enough? Do they want to publicly execute this guy in the city in front of everybody? Like, why these riots over something that is getting justice?
Well, I think the riots are, again, that faction that is not properly protesting, and that higher group that is just coming in to create havoc. But when we talk about what's been in the media for the last decade and black person versus police officer and vice versa, I think we need to look at the situation and the issue much deeper than we do. So when an incident like what happened in Minneapolis occurs, typically we'll hear in the news reports, white police officer kills black man or black woman. When the real issue that we need to dive into is, why does it seem like all of these violent contacts occur between minorities and the police? Why is there increased contact between those two groups? And it goes generationally, if not centuries old, back to when, just after the Civil War and slavery was abolished and minorities were moved throughout America and migrated north. And they were plunked down in our towns, even Aurora and Elgin here in Kane County, in small sectors of the town, basically into huts and small shacks, and never given the same opportunity as the white people around them. So you fast forward, centuries and generations, and because they were not given the same schooling, the same job opportunity, many of them turned to the black market for opportunities. And of course, the black market is what the police are there to combat against. And so that increases their contacts with law enforcement. So that's where the distrust really stems from. And as it folds over in generations, I always use this quote when I speak in the community that, the grandson watched his grandfather get arrested in front of his house, on a traffic stop, let's say, and then you fast forward another generation, and that same grandson watches his father maybe get in a foot chase or a struggle with police in front of the house in their own neighborhood, and now it's his generation, and he's an adult, and now the police are pulling him over in his neighborhood, and it's just that constant elevation and escalation of aggravation that it's leading to the rioting that we see now and the protests and the anger and anxiety we see now. And nobody has really dove in and addressed that imbalance in our own society. So that's why I always say over the last year and a half, it's incredibly important for us not just to lead these programs, these reformative programs in the jail and the exit programs as people return to the community, to return them supported and a better person, but it's also going to be on law enforcement. And of course, the other elected officials and mayors, and even the governor, to lead those community-based programs to truly educate and support those social groups that have been relatively abandoned for generations.
And I'm going to jump in there because I respect what you're saying, but programs have limitations. Programs can only go so far. What do you think about the argument that these police forcing, they have to be representative of the community? Is that something that is fundamentally important in community engagement, in community trust, that a police force must represent the demographics of that community?
Yeah, absolutely. And we try very hard to recruit from our own county here at Kane County Sheriff's Office. And, I myself grew up here, wanted to be a Kane County Sheriff's deputy since I was 4 years old. And that gives me deep roots and a deep love and appreciation for all of our community.
Well, and you know what? I can't think of a better place in a community, in a program to go than the building trades unions or any union. I mean, you get education, you get training, you get work. I mean, I always was raised that idle hands are the work of the devil. So get busy, get active. I mean, you get in a trade, you learn a skill, and it keeps you somewhere to go. I mean, Mark, how important are these for young men and women, these trade programs, just building careers and building really good people in society?
Yeah, you said it. You hit the key word. It's a career in the building trades. It isn't just a job. You have a pension. You also have benefits, health care, and decent pay. So we always try to recruit. We have our schools, our apprenticeship schools, where there's millions of dollars that our employer partners we spend on to make sure that people are trained properly. We do seminars, and we also hold job fairs at our union hall. I think the last job fair we had was last May. We're just going to do it this year. But the job fair is with the 16 building trades get together, and we bring in all the high school students. They're seniors that are looking maybe not to go to college. Maybe they have a different path. And this is a path for some of them. And usually there's 500 or 600 of them, students looking to come into the union programs. And it seems to work out real well for both of us because the employer is always looking for young people. And we want to make sure that they have the proper skills needed to do the work. And so it's a nice partnership. I myself have been into the community and reached out, and it's taking hold. Aurora is, I want to say Aurora is 50, maybe 60% Latino. Our local reflects that. Our local is about 50-50% membership. But the whole idea is to get people who don't want to go into college into a career path that they can sustain a lifestyle in the middle class with benefits and health care. And the unions are there for them.
Well, and it keeps them into something productive for society. And like I said, I could say pretty certainly that I guarantee, at least on the bricklayers end, they're not out here right now rioting, burning down the city, looting, because they have good careers and they've been blessed to keep working. So, I mean, it's so important to just, and even with the sheriff, like Sheriff Hain, you were saying, these guys that do get arrested, if they come out, they need to find something to get into. I mean, there has to be somewhere that these people can go to make a real living so that they do stay out of trouble.
Well, I'm actually going to just jump in there real quickly, Sean. I kind of feel like the union should actually go beyond that, because you're right, they're not out there, they're not causing the destruction. But I believe these kind of social justice changes and some reforms, at least like the sheriff was saying, there's that faction that's out there for a principle. And I think if we preach unity, we should, as union members, be out there on the front line arguing the good point and being out there with those other protesters who are, and we have seen this over and over again, we're confronting the worst element of society, telling them this is not what we're out here standing for.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, that's my opinion on it. It sounds to me like the sheriff, who obviously is going to have a lot going on, may have to jump off soon. I don't know if you're still with us. If you are, if there's a few parting words you want to say, if you already had to jump off, we very much thank you for being on with us, Sheriff. But you still on with us?
Yeah, and obviously he has his hands full. He's busy, so
completely.
And we give respect to all of our first responders, all of our law enforcement. I mean, the ones that are out there doing good work and fighting for the people. It's sad that you got to go and deal with these protests and riots happening all over the city. I mean, it's please be safe to everybody out there fighting it.
Absolutely, and I think it's worth reiterating what we've heard from the sheriff himself is that there are different factions to this. There are people out there who are principled, who are fighting because there's a socioeconomic disparity, that there is something that genuinely puts them in fear for their life. And this is something because, not despite the love for the country, but because of their love for the country, that they're out there fighting, that they're out there wanting to change, that they're out there trying to work within the system to make sure, using their First Amendment right, making sure that they can solve this problem. And then you always have the knuckleheads who are out there taking advantage and exploiting something. And that's really what we got to combat.
Well,
it's important to remind people that this is the constitutional right of people to go out there and peacefully assemble, peacefully protest something that they believe is fundamentally wrong.
Oh, and nobody knows that better than us because, like I say, we are professional protesters. I mean, that's what, as union members, we do. But these people that are out there burning and rioting, I mean, they need to smarten up. They need to find a career. And I think right now, Mark, I mean, back me up on this. I think it's the greatest moment for unions to help rebuild this working class and get people, re-energized in the labor movement, rebuilding it. Are you there, Mark?
They lost us. The radio station lost us. So were they putting a commercial? Oh, well, we're still live on this feed, right? Well, guys, again, just to explain to you what is happening, although our radio show is on WCPT, what you're watching is simulcast on WCPT, 9 counties. But of course, we cannot forget, while we are dealing with civil unrest all throughout the country, we're also in a situation where we're dealing with a pandemic. In order to be cognizant of that, for the safety of our crews, and just what we're doing, we have been remotely operating out of this home studio when possible. Today's our first day kind of doing this together. But of course, there's going to be technical issues and problems when we do that. So we just wanted to give you a little bit of an insight as to what's going on. What we will not compromise, however, on is getting that good message out there to you, getting a strong message about issues that are very pertinent to what's going on there. And at the end of the day, whether it's radio, whether it's online, the important thing is the message, right, Sean? I mean, it doesn't matter how you get this message. It doesn't matter anything but the discussion we're having, because the one way we're going to unify this country and move on is to have an open dialogue, an open discussion, not blame the other guy for not believing what you believe.
Registered Investment Advisor. Cetera is under separate ownership from any other named entity. Office location at 5321 South 94th Avenue, Orland Park, Illinois, 60462.
All right, go guys.
And just real quickly, we want to thank both of our guests.
Sheriff Ron Hain, we appreciate him coming on. And like I say, I hope he's safe out there, standing up and fighting for us and doing everything he's doing for the county of Kane County. And Mark Guethle, the Painters Union. Do you want to say some final words, Mark?
Yes, I do. Thank you for having me on, Sean and Raja. I appreciate the time. One last thought about unions. So like a lot of the people my age and their sons and daughters are getting to the age of going to maybe picking a career and going to college have a different view of unions and maybe not thinking that's the right path. Think of this party moment. An average painter working in Aurora, working full-time, roughly makes about $80,000 a year plus benefits. And that is, you have no school debt, you can start right away, and it's a 3-year program. So that's all I had to say. Thank you for having me on.
No, we appreciate you guys coming on. And I, like I say, I appreciate all of our essential workers, all of our union workers that are out there that have been working through this pandemic. You know, it's all of our law enforcement, our first responders that now are working through a pandemic and now working through the rioting and all this craziness that's happening. And like I say, to all the people, you know, it's time to smarten up, time to take that crazy energy that are going to burn the city and put it into a union, put it into something constructive. And let's start rebuilding society a little bit, focusing around the importance of working men and women. But we appreciate you guys coming on.
And Sean, I'm just going to take it from here and just add my 2 cents to it. I think the value of what we do here, whether you're listening on radio, whether you're listening on our Facebook at Life, Love, and the Grind, is the opportunity to dialogue, because we're never going to get out of the silo of thinking. Because obviously, like the sheriff had said, there's 100 different Americas. There's 100 different experiences in what makes the America, what weaves this tapestry. And unless we look beyond what our experiences are and have an honest to God, candid discussion about what can we do to work together? What can we do? Just like we do in the unions, man. I mean, how many times have we disagreed within the unions? But at the end of the day, we realize that we have a better, stronger presence. We have a better, stronger movement when we work together. We're never going to get out of this situation. So to work together and to fundamentally have this discussion is 100% why I believe both Sean Allen, myself, Raza Siddiqui are in this. And Sarah Sadat. Cannot forget Sarah Sadat, who's off camera, but who always helps us with this. But thank you to both of our guests for weighing in today and helping us continue this discussion.